You sit across from them. They smile, but it doesn't reach their eyes. Their voice is soft, their words reasonable, yet something inside you twists. You agree to their proposal, not because it's right, but because somehow, saying no feels disloyal, even unsafe. The moment passes, and you can't explain why you feel smaller, diminished, as if a thread of your will has been quietly severed. And you only realize it after the fact. The most dangerous prisons are not built of iron and stone. They are forged from language, obligation, and illusion, carefully constructed by people who never raise their voice, never lift a finger. Masters of emotional sleight of hand, these manipulators do not coerce by force. They seduce by distortion. They sell you your own fears dressed up as loyalty, your guilt repackaged as duty. And when you finally resist, they make you feel like the betrayer. But here's the paradox that burns. What if, to truly free yourself from manipulation, you must become a manipulator? This is the contradiction that unsettles the moral compass. How do you ethically defend against someone who weaponizes empathy, trust, and vulnerability without becoming what you despise? Can a sword of deception be used in the service of truth? Can you outplay a mind that only plays games without being pulled into its logic? And most terrifying of all, if you can, should you? Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." He wasn't talking about surface-level affirmations. He meant that in order to evolve, you must first face the parts of yourself you were taught to exile. Your shadow, your aggression, your hunger for power, your capacity to deceive. Not to indulge them, but to understand them, integrate them. Because in the end, what you repress does not disappear. It governs you from the dark. What if the only way to break free from a manipulator is to outmatch them? Not by playing their game, but by learning its rules so well you transcend it? This is not a tutorial in trickery. It is a psychological reckoning, an ethical battle, a philosophical descent into the tension between self-protection and moral purity. It asks, when you're in the jaws of someone who manipulates the narrative, are you obligated to play fair? What does fairness even mean when the game itself is corrupt? To see through the manipulator, you must first see yourself, unfiltered, not the version you present to the world, the raw, feral psyche beneath your social mask, the one who has known betrayal, the one who's felt the urge to retaliate, the one who's fantasized even briefly about turning the tables. That voice you were told to ignore, the shadow that Jung claimed holds the key to your wholeness. You can't defeat a manipulator by remaining naive. Empathy alone will not save you. They exploit it. Passivity will not buy you peace. They interpret it as permission. Even confrontation can backfire. They are masters at flipping guilt like a mirror, making you question your own reality. You raise your voice, and suddenly you're the aggressor. You pull away, and now you're the cold one. Their skill is not brute control, but psychological misdirection. They make you feel like the villain in your own story. So where does that leave you? At a crossroads. Do you keep being the better person, quietly hemorrhaging boundaries until you disappear into someone else's agenda? Or do you learn how to ethically subvert their tactics, not to dominate, but to disengage their control? This is not about manipulation in the way it's commonly understood. This is about ethical inversion, the use of strategic thinking, psychological insight, and shadow integration to disarm deception without becoming deceptive. It's not about playing dirty. It's about no longer being defenseless, but it requires a cost, a shedding of illusions. You must abandon the belief that all manipulation is evil. It isn't. Manipulation is influence. Influence is power. Power, when wielded consciously, is not inherently corrupt. It is neutral. It becomes dark only when it serves the ego at the expense of others. But when it protects the soul from coercion, when it shields truth from distortion, when it exposes the liar with their own methods, then it becomes something else entirely. Alchemy. And here's where the existential vertigo begins. What if the manipulator is not a person, but a system? A culture? A worldview? What if the manipulator lives inside you, your conditioned desire to be liked, approved of, agreeable. What if the most profound manipulation is the internalized voice that tells you, don't fight back? That's not who you are. Who told you that? Why did they benefit from you believing it? How much of your goodness was sculpted to serve others' comfort, not your integrity? And can you be both good and powerful? Most people never ask these questions. It's too dangerous, too destabilizing. Better to stay numb, trapped in the repetition of people-pleasing, vague resentment, and confusion. Because clarity would demand something radical. The will to act differently, to stop performing virtue and start embodying sovereignty. But once you ask, once the curtain is pulled back, you can never unsee the truth. Manipulators are not rare. They are everywhere. In romantic relationships that stifle your autonomy, in family dynamics that guilt you into silence, in workplaces where psychological games replace honesty, in ideologies that shame dissent as betrayal, and the only way out is through the fire of awareness. You must learn the mind of the manipulator, not to emulate it, but to transcend it. You must study their patterns not from hatred, but from curiosity. You must train your intuition to detect the subtle cues, the loaded language, the false binary choices, the gaslighting cloaked in concern. You must learn to hold your emotional line, not with brute resistance, but with quiet, unnerving clarity. You must know how to make them feel seen, truly seen, because nothing terrifies a manipulator more than being exposed. And you must know when to speak, when to vanish, when to reflect their energy back so sharply they can no longer deny themselves. This is not about becoming a predator. This is about becoming untouchable. And so, the great question lingers. Can you manipulate the manipulator without losing your soul? Or does defending yourself from darkness require embracing a shadow of your own? The next step demands, more than curiosity, it demands the willingness to shatter illusions. To uncover the hidden roots beneath manipulation, we must dig deeper. Into the psyche, into philosophy, into the social fabric that quietly programs us to be controlled. What if manipulation thrives not in malice, but in unmet needs? Masked pain and fractured identities? What if the manipulator was once the manipulated? And what if you've been part of this web longer than you know? Let's go there. The moment you realize you've been manipulated, a strange silence settles in your mind. It's not just betrayal you feel, it's disorientation. You thought you were free. You thought your choices were your own. But beneath every yes you uttered, beneath every concession, was an invisible script you didn't know you were following. Where did it come from? Why did you obey? Carl Jung warned that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That is not metaphor, it is diagnosis. You are not just reacting to a manipulator. You are reacting to every psychological wound that trained you to seek approval over truth, harmony over authenticity, belonging over boundaries. Manipulators do not create your weakness. They exploit it. And that weakness, it is almost always a fragmentation of the self, rooted in the deep, psychic split between who you are and who you were told to be. The child learns quickly. Cry too loudly and love is withdrawn. Assert your will and punishment follows. Displease the parent, the teacher, the priest, and the warmth that sustains your world turns cold. So you adapt. You shrink the parts of yourself that threaten rejection. You exile your anger, your sharp insight, your intuitive resistance. You become pleasing, predictable, safe. But the price of that safety is self-abandonment. And in that vacuum, manipulation thrives. Nietzsche called it resentment, a deep, psychological inversion in which the powerless begin to sanctify their own weakness, not out of virtue, but as a survival strategy. Unable to confront the source of oppression directly, they internalize it. They rewrite the story. Submission becomes nobility. Compliance becomes kindness. But beneath that surface, a storm brews. A longing for power that has no ethical outlet. A desire to control others, masked as morality. This is the shadow at the root of manipulation. The manipulator is not always a villain. Sometimes, they are merely a soul who has never learned how to ask for what they want directly. So, they twist reality to get it sideways. Sometimes they are not cruel, but terrified. Terrified of abandonment, of unworthiness, of truth. Their tactics are a survival dance. They control because they cannot connect. They distort because reality, as it is, feels unbearable. Arthur Schopenhauer once wrote that compassion is the only true moral motivator. But what happens when compassion is used as a trap? When someone feigns vulnerability to draw you in, only to make you responsible for their well-being? Now the very virtue that should liberate you, empathy, has become your leash. But how did we arrive here? It is no accident. Manipulation has cultural roots. Look around. Advertising manipulates your desires. Politicians manipulate your fears. Social norms manipulate your self-concept. From the moment you could speak, you were trained to adapt your identity to gain approval. Be polite, smile, don't make people uncomfortable. This isn't evil, it's socialization. But when taken to extremes, it becomes a form of self-erasure. Jean-Paul Sartre called it bad faith, the human tendency to lie to ourselves in order to avoid the burden of freedom. We pretend we are powerless. We tell ourselves we have no choice. We make ourselves victims, not because we are weak, but because the alternative, radical responsibility, is terrifying. If you are free, then your choices are yours. So is your suffering. Manipulators often live in bad faith, but so do their targets. Because confronting manipulation means confronting complicity. The subtle ways you allowed yourself to be controlled. Because resistance felt too risky. Because deep down, you feared the cost of standing alone. But this is where Viktor Frankl offers a light. Even in the most controlled environments, he argued, human beings possess the ultimate freedom, the power to choose their response. Frankl survived the Holocaust, and still wrote, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances." That power is real, but it must be reclaimed, and reclamation begins with brutal honesty. Ask yourself, when did I first learn to ignore my instincts to maintain peace? Who taught me that saying no was selfish? What unspoken contracts have I made with people who demand my compliance in exchange for conditional affection? Have I ever used guilt or silence to manipulate someone's behavior, even unintentionally? These are not accusations. They are invitations to clarity. Because manipulation is not only something done to you, it's something the psyche learns to participate in, often unconsciously. The same internal wounds that make you susceptible to a manipulator can also make you more likely to become one, especially when you feel unseen, unsafe, or unworthy. But here lies a strange kind of hope. If manipulation is rooted in psychological fragmentation, then healing that fragmentation is the most subversive act of all. If manipulators thrive in the absence of self-awareness, then your awareness becomes your sword. Not to attack, but to cut through illusion. So what is that illusion? It is the belief that you must choose between compassion and self-protection. You don't. The manipulator wants you to think you do. That's their leverage. They frame resistance as cruelty. They twist self-respect into selfishness. But that is their wound speaking. It is not your truth. Carl Jung argued that psychological integration requires embracing the shadow, the repressed, uncomfortable aspects of the self, not to indulge them, but to own them. Because what you do not own, owns you. Until you own your anger, manipulators will trigger it and use it against you. Until you own your hunger for autonomy, manipulators will offer you false freedom wrapped in control. Until you own your intelligence, manipulators will convince you to doubt your perception. And until you own your ability to influence others, manipulators will continue to influence you, unopposed. So we arrive at the fulcrum. Not the solution yet, but the core problem. You are not just battling them. You are battling the unconscious within yourself that has been trained to mistake compliance for love, silence for peace, and guilt for virtue. You've seen now that manipulation is not merely interpersonal. It is structural, spiritual, psychological. It is a mirror. And the moment you stop running from what you see in it, you reclaim the power to break its spell. But knowledge is not enough. You can understand the roots of the problem, see its mechanisms, trace its lineage, and still be trapped in it. Because the trap is not just mental. It is emotional, neurochemical, bodily. You freeze in their presence, not because you're weak, but because a lifetime of programming lives in your nervous system. So what happens when you no longer freeze? What happens when you begin to see through the scripts, the stories, the seductive tone of voice designed to distract? What happens when you stare into the manipulator's eyes and feel nothing, no obligation, no guilt, no confusion, only clarity? That moment is coming. But first, you must confront the silent cost of what you've endured. You must feel what manipulation has stolen from you. Your time, your confidence, your sense of reality. You must face the unseen consequences, because only then will you hunger for change enough to risk everything for it. You didn't notice it at first. Not really. The shift was subtle, like a thread slowly unraveling from your mind. You started second-guessing yourself. Tiny things at first. What you said, how you said it, whether your memory of the conversation was accurate. You began apologizing for things you didn't understand. Apologizing just to keep the peace, to avoid that chilling silence or those carefully crafted sighs. Somewhere along the line, you lost your own voice. This is how it begins. Not with a dramatic betrayal or some monstrous act of deception, but with a slow erosion of clarity. That is the genius of manipulation. It doesn't take your freedom all at once. It convinces you to give it away. And the consequences are far more insidious than most realize. You see, manipulation is not just about power games. It's about identity theft. Not in the literal sense, but psychological. Every time you bend your truth to accommodate someone else's illusion, you fracture the mirror of who you are. Every time you let someone redefine what's real, what happened, what you felt, what you meant, you begin to doubt your own perception. And perception is reality, which means the manipulator doesn't just change your behavior. They distort your very experience of the world. Over time, you lose trust, not in them, but in yourself. This is the unseen wound. It explains why, even after escaping the manipulator, you still struggle. You still hear their voice echoing inside your head, wearing your conscience like a mask. You hesitate to make decisions. You seek validation compulsively. You replay conversations wondering if you were the toxic one. Why? Because manipulation hijacks your internal compass. It's not just psychological. It's neurological. Studies in interpersonal neurobiology reveal that our brains are wired to form mental maps of the people we interact with frequently. When you're in close contact with someone, especially a partner, a parent, or a boss, your brain begins to simulate their responses in advance. You predict their reactions to avoid conflict. This is called anticipatory social cognition. But with a manipulator, this system backfires. You begin to live in a state of preemptive adaptation. You shrink before the blow ever comes. You tailor your tone, your timing, your truth, to avoid the emotional landmines. They've scattered across your shared reality. Over time, this becomes automatic. You don't even realize you're censoring yourself. You call it maturity, or kindness, or keeping the peace. But peace that costs your voice is not peace. It's quiet submission. And it comes with devastating long-term effects. Manipulation creates cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort that arises when your actions contradict your beliefs. You say yes, even when everything in your body screams no. You reassure someone who just hurt you. You defend someone who gaslights you. And to resolve this dissonance, your mind begins to rewrite the narrative. They didn't mean it. Maybe I'm too sensitive. I should be more understanding. Eventually, your internal logic collapses. This opens the door to a more destructive consequence. Learned helplessness. Coined by psychologist Martin Seligman. Learned helplessness describes the state in which a person, after repeated exposure to uncontrollable stress, stops trying to change their circumstances, even when escape becomes possible. It is psychological paralysis. And for those who have endured long-term manipulation, it is terrifyingly common. You begin to believe that no matter what you say or do, it won't matter. That any resistance will only invite punishment. That your suffering is inevitable. And so you stop resisting. You stop asking. You stop hoping. You smile. You nod. You perform normalcy while something inside you slowly dies. And the manipulator? They thrive in that silence. But it doesn't end with you. There is a ripple effect. When manipulation becomes normalized in your life, you start to replicate its patterns. Not maliciously, but unconsciously. You become conflict avoidant. You hint at your needs instead of stating them. You say, "I'm fine," when you're not. You over-accommodate. You use guilt, passive aggression, or emotional withdrawal. Not because you want to control others, but because you never learned any other way to be safe. The manipulated becomes the manipulator, not out of evil but out of inheritance. This is the cultural sickness. Manipulation passed down like trauma, generation to generation, cloaked in politeness, professionalism, and codependent love. And it gets even darker, because the manipulator, consciously or not, taps into a primal fear. Abandonment. This fear is biological, evolutionary. The infant depends on connection to survive. When love becomes conditional, the nervous system learns that rejection is death. And so the adult becomes hyper-attuned to rejection, to disapproval, to any signal that their place in the tribe is threatened. Manipulators weaponize this fear. They threaten emotional exile, subtly, skillfully. A cold shoulder, a delayed text, a sigh that says, "You've disappointed me." And because your nervous system equates disconnection with danger, you comply, not to keep them happy, but to keep yourself safe. So you stay. In the relationship, in the job, in the friendship that bleeds you dry. And here's the final devastating consequence. You begin to believe that this is all you're worth, that your role in life is to manage others' emotions, to preempt their disappointment, to keep their chaos from spilling into your world. You become the emotional janitor of everyone else's dysfunction. This is not your purpose, but it feels like it. Because manipulation reshapes not just your behavior, but your identity. You lose the memory of who you were before their influence. You forget what it feels like to speak without fear, to set boundaries without guilt, to want without shame. This is the psychic death Jung warned of. The loss of the self, the true self, buried beneath layers of performance, politeness, and fear. And yet, within this decay lies the seed of awakening. Because if your sense of reality can be broken, it can also be rebuilt. If your internal compass can be stolen, it can also be reclaimed. If the voice of the manipulator can live inside you, then so can a new voice, your own. But you must first feel the full weight of what's been taken. Do not minimize it. Do not rush to forgiveness. Do not tell yourself it wasn't that bad. It was. Not because it was loud or violent, but because it was invisible. Because it convinced you to abandon yourself with a smile on your face. Because it taught you to doubt the one person you can never escape, yourself. But you are not broken. You are waking up. The scars are real. The consequences are deep. But so is your capacity to reclaim your agency, to become the kind of person a manipulator cannot touch. Not because you are cold or cruel, but because you are clear. You must stop asking why they did it, and start asking, what now? What does it look like to walk out of the fog? What kind of person must you become to never fall for it again? What kind of power do you need to wield? Not to harm, but to liberate. That is the next step. Not escape, but rebellion. A psychological uprising. A soul-level refusal to ever be rewritten again. Let's ignite that next. There comes a moment, usually after the last apology you never owed, when something inside you refuses to bow again. It's quiet at first. Not anger, not rage. Something colder, older, a recognition, a remembering. It doesn't scream. It simply says, "No more." And in that moment, a revolution begins. Not against the manipulator. Against the part of you that made manipulation possible. Let this be clear. You do not break free by confronting the manipulator with a triumphant speech. This is not a movie climax. They won't suddenly realize what they've done and offer an apology that heals your wounds. Manipulators don't yield to confrontation. They absorb it. They spin it. They make your rebellion look like madness. So the rebellion must begin elsewhere. Internally. You must first overthrow the tyrant within. The internalized voice that whispers, "Keep the peace. Don't upset them. They didn't mean it." That voice is not yours. It was planted. You inherited it. And now it's time to burn it down. But how? Let's begin with something radical. Stop trying to be good. Not forever, but just for a moment. Suspend the identity of the good person. TM, the peacemaker, the empath, the forgiver. That identity has been hijacked, twisted, used against you. In the hands of a manipulator, your goodness becomes a muzzle. Schopenhauer once wrote that compassion is the highest virtue, but even he warned that compassion without wisdom becomes servitude. If your goodness demands self-erasure, it is not goodness. It is fear wearing a halo. So trade good for something deeper. Integrity. Goodness seeks approval. Integrity doesn't care. Integrity speaks truth when it's inconvenient. Integrity sets boundaries without permission. Integrity is not cruel, but it is unapologetic. This is your first weapon. Not manipulation, but clarity. The manipulator thrives in fog, emotional ambiguity, shifting narratives, subtle guilt. They can't operate in clear air. They need confusion. So become clear, not loud, not combative, just piercingly honest. Stop explaining yourself. Stop negotiating your reality. Try this. That doesn't work for me. I'm not available for that. I see what you're doing, and I'm choosing something else. No drama, no defense, just truth, delivered like a scalpel. The manipulator will flinch, not because you hurt them, but because you've named the pattern, and once named, their spell begins to break. Jung called this withdrawing the projection. The moment you stop seeing the manipulator as powerful, or broken, or fixable, and start seeing them simply as they are, a person using patterns to meet their needs at your expense. From that recognition, the second weapon arises, detachment. This is not coldness. It is precision. Detachment is the ability to witness their tactics without being pulled into them. When they guilt you, you don't explain. When they twist your words, you don't chase clarity. When they perform vulnerability to rope you back in, you don't rescue them. You see, you breathe, you hold your ground. This is how you become untouchable. Not by fighting, but by refusing to play. It's counterintuitive, yes. You were trained to believe that standing still invites attack, that not responding is weakness. But with manipulators, reaction is their fuel. They don't need your agreement. They need your engagement, your effort to make them understand, your desire to fix the dynamic. Withdraw that energy, and they wither. But there's something more dangerous than the manipulator outside. It's the one within. You see, once you've been manipulated, your nervous system becomes conditioned to anticipate threat. Even after the manipulator is gone, you carry their fingerprints in your thoughts. You become hypervigilant. You flinch at conflict. You doubt your instincts. This is the final prison, self-distrust. To break it, you must rebuild your inner authority. And for that, you need your shadow. The shadow is not evil. It is power unclaimed, rage repressed, insight denied. It holds the parts of you that knew something was wrong all along. The part that wanted to scream. The part that could have walked away. Integrate it. Talk to it. Ask, what did you see that I refused to look at? What strength did I bury to protect someone else's comfort? What am I afraid I'll become if I stop being so damn agreeable? The answers will not be pretty, but they will be true. And truth is your liberation. Once you integrate the shadow, you no longer fear your strength. You no longer need to manipulate to be safe. You stop using silence as a shield. You stop editing yourself to avoid rejection. You become whole. And a whole person is unmanipulatable, because you no longer need their validation. You no longer negotiate your reality. You no longer play a role in their drama. You simply walk out of the story. This is what Nietzsche meant when he said, "He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how." Your why must become sacred, non-negotiable. When you know who you are and who you are not, every attempt to manipulate you becomes laughably transparent. But here's the paradox. To disarm a manipulator, you must become capable of manipulation without using it. It's not about deploying tactics. It's about understanding them so deeply that they can no longer ensnare you. You study their strategies, not to fight fire with fire, but to become fireproof. You know how they guilt, so you recognize guilt as a tactic, not a truth. You know how they shift blame, so you stop accepting blame that was never yours. You know how they bait you into emotional confusion, So you develop emotional precision. This is the ethical inversion. You wield the awareness of manipulation, not as a weapon, but as armor. You don't manipulate back. You simply see through. And sight in a world of illusion is power. But be warned. Clarity comes with consequences. You will lose people. Manipulators do not stick around when their tactics stop working, nor do those who benefited from your silence. Some will call you selfish. Others will call you cold. But you must understand, they are grieving the version of you that served them, not the real you. Let them. Your freedom is not up for debate, because something extraordinary happens when you stop participating in manipulation on either side. You become clean. Your motives are transparent. Your boundaries are stable. Your heart is open but no longer exposed. You can love without losing yourself. You can walk away without guilt. You can speak the truth without trembling. This is not just escape. It is transformation. It is the alchemy of awareness, shadow, and will. And when you embody this, something even more profound occurs. You begin to see the manipulator, not as a monster, but as a fragmented self. You no longer need to punish them. You no longer need to fix them. You simply exit the illusion they depend on. This is the final rebellion. To become untouchable, you must become integrated. To become integrated, you must stop fearing your own power. Because only then can you wield it, not to dominate, but to protect. Not to deceive, but to discern. Not to manipulate, but to liberate yourself, and perhaps others. The final realization is coming. But you must be ready, because it will not just change how you see the manipulator. It will change how you see reality itself. Let's go there next. What if the manipulator wasn't your enemy? Not in the romanticized, they were just misunderstood sense, but in the deeper, more disturbing sense. What if they were the teacher your soul chose? To expose every lie you still believed about yourself? Sit with that. Breathe into it. Because the ultimate truth isn't about them. It's about you. And it always has been. The manipulator didn't take your power. They showed you where it was never claimed. They didn't silence your voice. They revealed the places you had already muted it. They didn't distort your reality. They entered a reality you were already uncertain about. This is the uncomfortable awakening. The manipulator is the mask. But you are the mirror. And a mirror cannot be manipulated. It reflects what is. Nothing more. Nothing less. That is your final freedom. Not to defeat the manipulator. Not to win some psychological chess match. But to become someone who no longer needs the game at all. That is what Jung meant when he said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. It is not the darkness in others that frees you. It is the darkness in yourself. When you can hold your shadow without shame, when you can acknowledge your capacity for control, deceit, silence, rage, and still choose clarity, honesty, sovereignty, then the manipulator loses their hook. Their game requires a willing player. You are no longer willing. But here is where it becomes even more sacred. You no longer need to resist them either. Because you've stopped resisting yourself. You've integrated the fractured parts. The exiled voices. The inner child who kept choosing the same pain because it felt familiar. You've walked into the fire. And you've returned with something the manipulator never expected you to find. Wholeness. Wholeness is not perfection. It's not being untouchable in some cold, aloof way. It's something much more powerful and paradoxical. It's the ability to hold contradiction, to be compassionate and unyielding, to be loving and unwilling to be used, to be open and fiercely discerning. Because the true opposite of manipulation is not brutal honesty. It is presence. Manipulators scatter. They create confusion, urgency, guilt. But presence stills the air. It stops the spin. It makes illusion visible. Your presence is now a blade that cuts through narrative. You walk into a room, and their story starts to unravel. Not because you said anything, but because you are no longer participating in the distortion of reality. You are not here to play their role. You're here to end the script. And when that happens, something incredible unfolds. You start to see other people's manipulation as symptoms, not threats. You recognize that most manipulators are stuck in their own trauma loops, unable to ask directly, to feel fully. to risk vulnerability. They are children in adult masks, using control as armor against abandonment, shame, and emptiness. And while you will not allow yourself to be pulled into their drama again, you also don't need to demonize them. You don't need to win. You don't need revenge. You have nothing to prove. You've already won the only battle that matters. The one inside you. This is liberation. This is the end of the story. Or rather, the beginning of a new one. In this story, your boundaries are not walls. They are windows. They let in only what nourishes you. They reveal who sees you clearly, and who only sees what they can extract. You no longer fear being misunderstood. You no longer crave to be seen by those who only mirror their projections. You've stopped editing yourself for proximity. You've remembered that the most sacred form of self-protection is not armor. It's alignment. But to live in alignment, you must ask yourself one last question. And it's the most important one. Who are you when no one is watching? When there's no one to please? No image to maintain? No manipulator to fight? What remains? Strip away the narratives, the guilt, the vigilance, the exhaustion. What is left? That is the self Jung spoke of. The one hidden beneath the persona. The one that manipulation could never truly touch. Only obscure. And now, the dust has settled. Now, you can feel it. That quiet presence at your center, unafraid, undeniable, untouchable. And in that presence, a final poetic irony becomes clear. The manipulator came to control you. But in doing so, they revealed where you were not yet free. They pointed, unintentionally, unwillingly, toward your liberation. They were the antagonist in a myth that your soul needed to complete its transformation. You didn't beat them. You outgrew the game. This is how you manipulate a manipulator, ethically. You don't outlie them. You don't deceive them better. You see through them. You hold your truth so completely that theirs dissolves. You become the unmoved center, the mirror that reflects their distortion back to them. And in that reflection, some will break. Some will awaken. Most will walk away. Let them. You are no longer interested in being understood by people who survive by misunderstanding others. Your life has changed frequencies. Manipulation doesn't exist on this level. It has no weight here, no traction. Here there is only truth, and clarity, and peace. Not the peace of compliance, the peace of full presence. So now the final question. Not how do I defeat the manipulator, but who am I now that I am free? Let that question haunt you. Let it inspire you. Let it burn away the final residue of illusion. And then step forward, not to fight, not to flee, but to live, fully, uncompromised, unapologetic, unmanipulated, unmasked, because you were never powerless. You were only waiting for the moment you remembered what was always true. You are the mirror. You are the sword. You are the fire. You are free.